YouTubers out there, this is Jerry at the Movies with your host Jerry Saravia. And today we're going to take a look at Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry at the Movies with your host Jerry Saravia. So today we're reviewing Young Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues. This was a 2-hour TV movie that was shown on television back in March of 1993. And what can I say? I mean, this was an enjoyable enough film. I've seen it a few times, being an Indiana Jones fan. Nobody can resist this particular episode because Harrison Ford appeared in the bookends of the story as an older 50-year-old Indiana Jones, and set in Wyoming in 1950. Now, a little backstory on Young Indiana Jones. This was George Lucas's attempt to bring back the character, which originally they were going to do a full-length feature shown in theaters with River Phoenix. At least that's kind of the rumor. Then that didn't turn out because River Phoenix passed on, unfortunately. So they decided to go with a television series. Now, what happened was that George Lucas, really what he wanted to do was a series that had, basically the pretext was history, to focus on history, historical fiction if you like, showing different historical figures, everyone from Pancho Villa to Teddy Roosevelt to Lenin, to, in this episode, Ernest Hemingway and Eliot Ness, and Al Capone, and Sidney Bechet. This is all just in this one episode, the last four I mentioned. But that was really the basics of the show, is that Indiana Jones, as a younger man, before he became the full-blown archaeologist adventurer that we all know from the 1930s and beyond, was going around the world, seeing different sites and meeting all types of historical figures. Now, Mystery of the Blues focuses on Indiana Jones as a busboy in Chicago in 1920 when he was attending University of Chicago, and his roommate is Eliot Ness. And he works at a club, a mafia-owned club called Colosimo's, and that's where he hears Sidney Bechet and Louis Armstrong, by the way, playing jazz and the blues and so on. And apparently young Indy has a fondness for the saxophone. Now, it's not a tenor sax, but my goodness, now I totally forgot. Oh, soprano sax. So Sidney Bechet, played in a film by Jeffrey Wright, truly marvelous performance, says, if you're interested in playing sax, you can play with us. And of course, young Indy embarrasses himself because he doesn't get the rhythm. He doesn't have the emotion, the feel for the blues. Anyway, young Indy also is, he's friends with Eliot Ness, played by Frederick Weller, and friends with Ernest Hemingway, future author, played by Jay Underwood. And all three get involved in this plot where they uncover some mob control at Colosimo's, and there's a murder and so on. In addition to all that, young Indy discovers racism when he tries to go to the beach, and he's told that this is only for the coloreds, the blacks. I mean, there was segregation back then, of course. And there's a lot of jazz in this film, a whole lot of it. Prohibition-era gangsters, of course, Al Capone, played by Michael Turturro, and discussion of World War I, a couple of floozies here and there. There's a car chase, and there's an absurd and truly improbable finale that wraps everything up a little too neatly. But I understand that, hey, it's young Indiana Jones. It's not really meant to be historically accurate in any other fashion aside from actual historical figures appearing in something that they never really participated in with someone who is fictitious, young Indiana Jones. Now, the overall story itself is not bad. I mean, it's kind of entertaining, and but what's interesting about this series is that it didn't have the serialesque quotient or quotient of serialesque escapism that the Indiana Jones movies had. And so what I think had happened is that Lucas decided to focus on the history of certain situations and take out the action and adventure elements and almost make it kind of like a drama to a certain extent. Sometimes he went further, like with the into some sort of an action adventure realm with Treasure of the Peacock's Eye, for example, or excuse me, or another episode about the Hollywood Follies and so on and so forth. But basically, was the focus was on history, and so you know you're not going to see Indiana Jones taking out his bullwhip. He doesn't really, you know, there are moments where he shoots at people, you know, or the Phantom Train of Doom, for example. There are some gunfights, but for the most part, it's not action oriented. It's more historically oriented with drama. This particular one is not bad. It just feels a little overstuffed. There's a little too much of everything here. You know, he meets Sidney Bechet. He also knows Ernest Hemingway and Eliot Ness. I mean, are you kidding me? You know, isn't it possible that maybe Indiana Jones might know some people who were not famous, you know, in history? That, you know, Pancho Villa? I mean, but, you know, it's Indiana Jones. It's, again, this is not really a true historical lesson, aside from knowing more about the people involved in history and why they were known historically. Now, Mystery of the Blues, as I mentioned earlier, has Harrison Ford instead of the 90-year-old Indiana Jones with the eye patch, who would often serve the bookends of each episode. This one had Harrison Ford as a slightly younger man, though not younger than young Indy, of course. And this one is an interesting bit of business because he's in an actual chase with a Native American played named Gray Cloud, and they're escaping some villains who want possession of some sort of a majestic ceremonial Native American pipe, of all things. And what was fun about that is that it's set in Wyoming in 1950, which was interesting because most Indiana Jones stories, particularly even the show itself, but for the most part, the teasers in the movies, with the exception, you know, at that time anyway, since it didn't come out yet, of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, is that they were usually set somewhere else, in some foreign land somewhere. Here, the teaser is in Wyoming in 1950, and there's a blizzard, and he's driving along, and there's a lot of wit there. I just had goosebumps watching it because it was so great to see Harrison Ford doing what he does best. It's this role, is Indiana Jones. This is the role that he was just somehow born to play. And then the latter bookend has the villains finding them in a log cabin because you know, shelter from the snow, and it gets a little bit silly there. But it's Indiana Jones. You know, it's not. I mean, this, even those bookends with Harrison Ford can diminish any sort of memory of that Star Wars holiday special back in the day that was televised, which should never even have been shown on television. So it's not nearly to that degree, but it's still kind of silly even for Indiana Jones. But the episode itself, though, is fine. It's a little preachy, you know. It's overstuffed. There's too much going on. It resolves itself a little too neatly, but it's fun. So if you're interested in watching it, do so. It's on DVD, which is part of the. There are 3 different DVDs that have, I think, 10 episodes each or something like that. So it's the last edition of the Indiana Jones series that has this particular episode. Of course, it's also available on VHS for those of you who would rather not invest in a whole DVD set if you're not a big fan of the show. Now, one thing I had wondered about is that opening teaser, because I had always thought, what if that had been expanded into a whole 2-hour adventure of its own? I wonder if Lucas had considered it, but Harrison Ford was really not known for doing television at that time. Once he became a superstar, you barely ever saw him on television unless he was on Letterman or whatever else. And he would probably have commanded a high salary, which probably would be unaffordable. So I wonder if that was something that maybe he thought he could develop further in the future for a real Indiana Jones movie. Because at that time, most of you might not even know this, George Lucas did approach Harrison Ford about doing a fourth Indiana Jones while they were making this Mysteries of Blues episode. And he told him it would involve aliens, and Harrison Ford said, no, I'm not doing a flying saucer movie. That might be an interesting bit of trivia, fun fact for those who truly despised Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Count me among those who, maybe it's a minority who liked it, but yeah, there you go. So who knows? I always wondered how that story would resolve itself in Wyoming, and if maybe in some way George Lucas envisioned something else that he couldn't really do for television because Harrison Ford would command too high a salary and be unaffordable to do something longer than just a couple of bookends for a 90-minute, basically, TV movie. And that's all I got to say about that. Young Indiana Jones, it's, worth checking out, but it's nothing like the actual movies in my mind. But if you're a fan, do check it out, in particular to see Harrison Ford with a salt and pepper beard, which, by the way, he was making this episode at the same time that he was making The Fugitive. And The Fugitive, which came out in the summer of '93, some of you will recall that when you see him at the beginning of the film, he has this salt and pepper beard and slightly longish hair. And that's the way that he looks in this Young Indiana Jones TV movie. I guess, he's not going to trim the beard when he needs it for this movie. So, Young Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues. There you go. And this is Jerry the Movies with your host, Jerry Saravia, signing off.